Richard Hayes froze, the plane's hum louder than the beating of his heart. Maya, the black maid, had just fallen asleep on his shoulder, her head resting on him like she belonged there. The billionaire's breath caught, but he didn't pull away. The eyes of everyone around them felt like daggers. He could feel the heat rise in his chest, a silent rage building. He was the master of this world, yet there she was, violating everything he thought he controlled. As the plane soared on, tension crackled in the air. His hand hovered, unsure whether to push her away, but something held him back. And then, without warning, he did something that would change everything. Something that no one expected. The question was, why? Maya woke to the soft hum of the plane's engines, a familiar noise, yet not one she'd ever get used to. Her back ached from the uncomfortable seat, and she rubbed her stiff neck, trying to shake off the weariness. She glanced up, meeting the billionaire's cold eyes for a moment, but quickly looked away, not wanting to draw attention. She didn't belong here. She never had. Her life wasn't one of luxury, but she was used to it. The smell of bleach and disinfectant was more familiar to her than the scent of fresh-cut grass. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Asterisk. You're never less than anyone, Maya. Remember that. Asterisk. It kept her grounded, even when she was stuck mopping floors in places like this, serving people who barely noticed her presence. She didn't mind the work, but sometimes the weight of it all pressed down on her. Maya pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, the fabric worn thin from years of use. The cold didn't bother her anymore. It was just another reminder that the world had more than enough for those who already had everything, and not nearly enough for people like her. Her hands, calloused from hours of scrubbing, gripped the edge of her seat. She wanted to sleep. She needed to sleep. But it wasn't just the exhaustion that weighed her down. It was the constant feeling of being invisible, of being unnoticed by those who could change her life with a single word. She had learned to hold her head high, to maintain her dignity. There was power in that, even when the world told her she had none. As she closed her eyes, her mind wandered to a moment that had happened long ago. Her younger brother, Jermaine, had broken his leg and needed surgery. The doctor had looked at their mother, her worn-out face desperate, and then shook his head. It's too expensive, he had said. But Maya didn't let them give up. She went to every neighbor, knocked on every door, asking for help. They said no. But one man, a stranger, had slipped $100 bill into her hand. For your brother, he had said, his eyes soft but tired. She never knew who he was, but that moment stayed with her. That man had no reason to help, but he did. Maya had learned that people had their own way of showing kindness. She just had to find it. And now, here she was in the same position. Alone, tired, invisible, but still holding on to that glimmer of hope. She tried to focus on the quiet rhythm of her breathing as she let herself drift off, the soft sound of Richard's breathing nearby. She didn't know what the future held, but at least she could hold her head high for this moment. As the plane began its descent, Maya felt a small weight shift in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things would be different this time. The mansion loomed in the distance, a cold monument to wealth, its sprawling grounds almost as vast as Richard Hayes' empire. The marble pillars caught the late afternoon sun, gleaming in a way that almost felt unnatural, as though the house itself existed to remind the world of its power. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. The walls were lined with portraits of men and women who were not just rich, they were untouchable. The long dining table gleamed under a crystal chandelier, silver cutlery placed precisely, as if to declare, "We are in control here." Richard stood by the window, his back straight, watching the sprawling estate. His face was like stone, calm, unfeeling. The world he inhabited was one of rules he had set, boundaries only he could cross. "You can't expect to understand this world, Maya," he had said earlier, his voice distant, almost as if she wasn't in the room. Asterisk. This is for those who've earned it. Asterisk. Maya hadn't replied. She never did. But his words stung more than he realized. Was the way he said it, the casual dismissal that made it clear, to him at least, that she was a temporary fixture in his world. She was there to serve, to stay invisible. He could afford to forget her existence, just as easily as he could afford the finest wine, the most exclusive events. The invitation to the gala, the one she had hoped for, was a mere courtesy. She wasn't meant to belong in a world like that, not really. The waiters moved quickly, their movements practiced, rehearsed. It was a dance of efficiency, and Maya knew her part all too well. But the guests, they moved in another rhythm entirely, a rhythm of being. Their laughter loud, their voices dripping with entitlement, their words floating above her head as though she wasn't even there. And then there was Richard, always poised, always at the center. His charisma didn't come from kindness, but from the subtle reminder that he had everything. Power wasn't just in his wealth. It was in the way he made others feel small without a single word. A smile that was never for her. A glance that never lingered. When he looked at her, it wasn't a person he saw. It was a role. His hand, always so confident, always so sure. He was everything she wasn't. A man who never questioned his worth. Maya felt it every time she was near him, how much of a stranger she was to this life. The wealth, the coldness, the sharpness of it all. She belonged to another world, one where she didn't have a say, where her existence was more about survival than living. And yet, in that moment, as Richard's gaze drifted past her to a guest standing nearby, Maya couldn't help but wonder. Did he ever feel it too? The distance, the separation, the coldness of a world that never let him forget how far removed he was from the lives of people like her. But he'd never ask. He didn't need to, and she didn't dare to question it. She was nothing more than a shadow, lingering in a world that wasn't hers. The room was buzzing with the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the low murmur of the elite. Men and women wrapped in power, wrapped in themselves. Maya stood at the far end of the room, her eyes drifting over the sea of polished faces, the faintest tremor in her hands as she held the tray. The gala had been going smoothly until now. The argument began subtly, just a few words exchanged between two guests, but Maya could feel the tension shift in the air. One of the guests, a woman dressed in a deep red gown, had grown visibly agitated, her face flushed. She had been speaking with Richard for nearly 15 minutes when the woman suddenly raised her voice, her words sharp and accusatory. "I can't believe you would suggest something like that. Do you think I'm stupid?" The crowd fell silent, every eye darting between Richard and the woman. Richard's expression remained unchanged, cold, impassive, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Maya stood frozen, her heart racing, but something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a maid tonight. She wasn't just a shadow passing by. She had been trained to observe, to listen, to serve. And right now, she was seeing something that needed to be said. As the voices grew louder, as Richard's posture stiffened with irritation, something inside Maya snapped. The risk was there, heavy, like a brick waiting to fall. This was the moment that could cost her the job, that could get her sent home, humiliated, treated as less than. But she couldn't stay silent. Not this time. Her fingers gripped the edge of the tray tighter, her knuckles white. As the woman's voice rose again, Maya stepped forward, her presence cutting through the tension like a blade. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice steady, louder than usual. The crowd went still. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, a collective gasp hanging in the air. Richard turned, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What did you just say?" the woman demanded, the venom in her tone unmistakable. Maya's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "If I may," she said, her heart pounding, "there's a misunderstanding. The situation isn't what it seems." The room fell into a heavy silence. It wasn't just the woman's eyes on her now, but every guest, every pair of eyes waiting for Richard's reaction. This was no longer just a fight between two wealthy people. It was a spectacle, and Maya had stepped into the center of it. She could feel the heat of their judgment, the way their gazes drilled into her like nails. She didn't belong here, not really, but her voice hadn't faltered. "I'm sorry," Richard's voice broke through, as cold as the marble floors beneath their feet. But this doesn't concern you. His words hit her like a slap, but Maya didn't retreat. She could feel the weight of the risk in her chest, the threat of losing everything she had worked for in the span of a single breath. "It's not about me, sir," she replied, forcing the words out despite the lump in her throat. "It's about fairness." The silence was suffocating. Richard's eyes narrowed further, but the woman, still fuming, suddenly stopped, her expression faltering as she looked around. The guests weren't just watching, they were waiting for him to react. A cold shiver ran through Maya as the room seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Richard broke the silence, his voice low, sharp, cutting. "I think we'll be done here," he said, turning on his heel, dismissing Maya's intervention as if it had never happened. The woman huffed, fuming, but Maya stood her ground, unwilling to back down. She knew the consequences. She knew how quickly the world could turn its back on someone like her. Someone who wasn't supposed to speak, wasn't supposed to be noticed. But in that moment, Maya felt something stronger than fear. Something in her shifted. The risk had been real. Losing her job, the humiliation, the coldness of his words. But what mattered was the act itself. She had acted. She had spoken when no one else would. The guests murmured among themselves, the moment passing, but Maya knew. She had made her mark. The question was no longer what Richard would do, but what she would do next. Maya stood frozen, the weight of the room pressing in on her chest like 1,000 invisible hands. The conversation had stopped, but the silence felt louder than any words ever could. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each one tight, controlled. She could feel the eyes of the entire room on her, cold, judgmental, like the gaze of every guest was burning into her skin. Richard Hayes stood at the center, his back turned, his posture stiff. The way he dismissed her without a second thought was like a slap, but it wasn't just his coldness that stung. It was the way the entire room seemed to follow his lead. She had dared to speak. She had dared to challenge the world they lived in, and now the consequences were unfurling, one harsh moment after another. She felt her face flush with shame, the heat rising, not from embarrassment, but from the anger bubbling inside her. It was the same anger she had carried since she was a child, growing up in a world that never saw her, never cared to. And yet, here she was, standing before a room full of people who saw her as nothing more than a servant. "I think we've heard enough." Richard's voice cut through the air, his words cold, dismissive. He didn't even turn to face her. "You've overstepped." His words felt like daggers, each one a reminder that she didn't belong here. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clenched them into fists at her sides. She had fought for this moment, for the right to be heard. But in the end, it didn't matter. The weight of the room was too much. She was just the maid. She was just someone who had crossed a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. The woman in red, the one who had started it all, looked at Maya with thinly veiled contempt. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice sharp, like a knife. "Who do you think you are, speaking up like that? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Maya's stomach tightened. She knew the answer, of course. She had crossed a boundary she had no business crossing. But she couldn't take it back now. "You think you're better than us?" the woman continued, her voice dripping with venom. "Just because you read a few words and think you know better? This isn't your place." Maya felt every word hit her like a punch. The woman's gaze burned into her, and for a moment, Maya wanted to shrink back, to disappear. She had been invisible for so long that the pressure of being seen, really seen, was suffocating. Richard, still turned away, didn't even acknowledge her as he casually sipped his drink, as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't matter, as if her words were nothing but a nuisance. The room was waiting for him to speak, for him to punish her for stepping out of line. "Richard, this is absurd," the woman in red said, her voice rising with a certain level of satisfaction. "You can't just let this go. She's nothing but a maid. She has no right to talk to us like that." Maya felt the tears sting the corners of her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had stood tall for so long, longer than anyone ever expected. She wasn't about to let them take that from her now. Perhaps she's forgotten her place, Richard said, his voice calm, indifferent. Maya. He finally turned to face her, his eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. I think it's time you leave. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't an offer. It was a command. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, the blood rushing to her ears. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. She opened her mouth, but all she could feel was the crushing weight of the room, the pressure of their eyes, the certainty that she was about to lose everything. Her dignity, her job, her place in this world. The woman in red smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle. See, Richard? She can't even speak for herself. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. It was enough to break her. Maya turned quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, her breath ragged. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The eyes of the room burned into her back as she made her way toward the door, each step heavier than the last. The moment she reached the hallway, she paused, her hand resting on the cold brass of the door handle. Her chest was tight, her heart racing. For a second, she thought about leaving, about walking away from it all, this world that never accepted her, that had never once given her a real chance. But then, in the quiet of the hallway, something inside her snapped. I won't go out like this. She could still feel the weight of the eyes on her, even though she was no longer in the room. She was still there. She still mattered. She had fought too long to let them win. With a deep breath, she turned back toward the door, her hand still gripping the handle. But before she could take another step, she heard Richard's voice again. Maya. His tone had softened, but the coldness remained. Leave. The word echoed in the empty hallway, and for a moment, everything felt still. Everything felt final. Maya stepped outside into the cool night air, the crispness of it wrapping around her like a blanket. The stars hung above in a sky that felt too far away, too distant to touch. The soft hum of the city seemed muffled here, as if the world outside had been shut off, leaving her alone in this brief silence. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the cold air filling her lungs and stinging her chest. She walked slowly, her footsteps echoing softly against the cobblestones, each one heavier than the last. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed space, needed air, needed to escape the weight of what had just happened. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, wavering shadows across the sidewalk. They were just like her, flickering, uncertain, barely enough to make the darkness bearable. The warmth of the mansion felt like a lifetime ago, like something she could never return to. The lights, the laughter, the conversation. It was all so foreign now. She was so far from it. But even in the emptiness of the night, there was something raw and honest about this moment. The cold didn't feel harsh anymore. It felt like a reminder, like life had been this way for her, cold and hard, and she had learned to endure it, learned to stand in it and keep going. There was a quiet kind of strength in that. The wind stirred, tugging at the ends of her coat, and she drew it tighter around her shoulders. She felt the weight of everything. Her mother's illness, the bills she could never pay, the silent rejection she'd felt her entire life. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't. She had learned that tears didn't change anything. They only made you weaker, made you visible in a way that was dangerous. As the chill of the night seeped into her bones, Maya stopped walking and looked up at the sky. Felt so vast, so full of possibilities, but so far beyond her reach. It was a beautiful kind of sadness. She had always felt like an outsider, even in her own skin. But in this moment, with the cold air biting at her face and the silence pressing in, she realized something. The world didn't care about her, no. But she had learned how to care about herself. She had learned how to stand on her own, even when everyone else had told her she didn't belong. Even now, she was still standing. The ache in her chest was a familiar one, but it didn't crush her anymore. It reminded her that she had survived so much, had walked through darkness and cold and loneliness, and still, she had never let it break her. Not completely. The streets were empty now, the city quiet. And for the first time in a long while, Maya didn't feel like she was walking through someone else's world. She wasn't invisible here. She wasn't small. The night was silent, but her breath came slower now, more even. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was just breathing, just existing in this space, this moment as she was. And that, in itself, was enough. The night had settled into a cold stillness when Richard stepped outside, the door closing behind him with a soft click. His footsteps echoed across the empty courtyard, his mind replaying the moments that had just unfolded inside the mansion. He hadn't expected Maya to speak up, not in the way she did, not with that quiet but unyielding confidence. And yet she had. He couldn't shake the image of her, standing there in front of him, her voice steady despite the weight of the room pressing down on her. She had crossed a line, yes, but there was something about her, something that felt different. He paused, his gaze wandering over the grounds, his thoughts pulling him back to that moment. He had dismissed her so easily, just like everyone else. But why did he feel unsettled? He was used to power. He was used to control. He didn't give a damn about the servants, the employees, the ones who came and went at his command. They were all the same. Or at least that's what he had always believed. But Maya had been different. He couldn't deny that. Richard exhaled sharply, pushing the thought away, but it clung to him, gnawing at the edges of his mind. He had seen something in her eyes, something raw, something real, and it made him uncomfortable. He turned and began walking toward the small garden just off the side of the mansion. The moonlight bathed the area in an eerie glow, casting long shadows over the neatly trimmed hedges. He was about to step into the garden when a voice called out to him. "Mr. Hayes, a word?" Richard froze, his back stiffening. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Veronica Ellison, the hotel's general manager, a woman who had long been an ally, someone he trusted. She was standing in the doorway, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowing as she watched him. "I need to speak with you," she said again, more firmly this time. Richard's lips tightened, but he nodded and turned toward her. "What is it, Veronica?" She took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the cobblestones. "It's about Maya," she began, her voice low but filled with urgency. Richard frowned. "What about her?" Veronica hesitated, her gaze flicking to the ground briefly before she met his eyes again. "I think you've made a mistake, Richard." He raised an eyebrow. "A mistake? I don't follow." Veronica let out a breath, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I've been looking into her, Richard, and I think you've underestimated her." Richard's jaw tightened, and a flash of irritation crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" Veronica didn't answer immediately. She took another step closer, her eyes intense. "Maya," she said slowly, "is not who she seems." Richard stiffened. "I don't understand." Veronica took a deep breath. "Maya is not just some maid, Richard. She's not just a servant or a nobody." The words hit him like a punch, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. "What the hell are you saying, Veronica?" He could feel his chest tighten, the familiar feeling of control slipping away. Veronica met his gaze steadily. "She's far more than that." Richard's mind raced, but he still couldn't grasp what she was implying. "What are you trying to tell me?" Veronica's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's the daughter of a powerful man, a man you've crossed before." Richard's heart stopped. His blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt. "What?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Her father. He's someone who's been in your sphere for years. Someone you've tried to buy out, tried to push out of the market. And Maya is his daughter." Richard's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle suddenly falling into place. He had known the name, of course. Everyone did. But he had never made the connection. He had never once thought to look at Maya, this quiet, seemingly insignificant maid, and consider her lineage. Veronica watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "You've made a huge mistake, Richard. Maya is not just a maid. She's not someone you can discard." Richard's breath caught in his throat, his mind whirling with 1,000 thoughts. The power he had so easily dismissed, the world he thought he controlled, it was all slipping away. Maya was not just a maid. She was the daughter of someone powerful, someone he had tried to force out of his business dealings, someone who could destroy him with a single word. He stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. "What the hell have I done?" he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Veronica. Veronica's gaze softened, just for a moment. "You need to fix this, Richard, before it's too late." The words hit him like a slap. Before it's too late. Richard had no idea what he had just done, what he had thrown away. Maya had been more than he could ever have imagined. He had dismissed her, humiliated her, pushed her away, and now the truth was staring him in the face. The power had shifted, and it wasn't in his hands anymore. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. He had been wrong. He had misjudged everything. And now he had to make things right, before it all fell apart. The sun had barely risen when Maya walked into the courtyard, the soft morning light casting long shadows over the stone path. The air was still cool, the quiet of the early hours settling around her like a protective veil. She moved slowly, her thoughts drifting, but there was a heaviness in her chest, a feeling that had been lingering since the night before. She wasn't sure where she was headed, but she didn't care. She needed time, space, away from everything that had happened. The sound of footsteps behind her made her pause, but she didn't turn around. She could feel them, slow, deliberate. They stopped just a few feet away, and for a long moment, there was silence. Then his voice. "Maya." It was Richard. His voice wasn't cold, like she had expected. It was uncertain. "I didn't expect you to still be here," he said, his words careful, almost fragile. Maya remained, still, her breath steady, though her heart was racing in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had already been through so much, had already made her peace with the world she lived in, with the way people saw her. "I owe you an apology," Richard continued, his voice low. "What I said, how I treated you, I was wrong." The words hung in the air, and Maya felt a strange sensation, a shift in the atmosphere. She couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her like this. The last time someone had looked at her and truly seen her, beyond the uniform, beyond the job. "I didn't know who you were," he said, his gaze focused on her, steady now. "But that's no excuse for what I did. I misjudged you. I dismissed you when I should have respected you." Maya turned slightly, but not enough to face him fully. She didn't need to look at him to know he was sincere. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, just quiet regret. She had expected anger, coldness, something harsher. But this was different. "I should have listened," he said, his words heavier than she'd imagined. "I'm sorry." Maya let out a slow breath, her hands still at her sides, her fingers curling slightly as if to hold onto the calm she felt. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected an apology, had never thought she would get one, much less from someone like him. The stillness around them felt deeper now, the world outside this moment fading away. Richard shifted, his gaze briefly flickering to the ground before returning to her. "I'll make it right," he added quietly, almost to himself. "Whatever it takes." Maya finally turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his. There was something different in the way he stood now. He wasn't the powerful man she had seen the night before. He was just a man, standing in front of her, vulnerable in his own way. She didn't know how to respond. Not with anger, not with bitterness. She had nothing to prove. "You don't have to do anything," she said softly. The words weren't harsh, but they carried something in them, a calm that only came from understanding. "I'm not here for you to fix it. I'm here to do my job. Nothing more, nothing less." Richard stood still for a moment, as if her words had struck him harder than anything he'd heard the night before. He wasn't used to hearing that from people. He wasn't used to someone who didn't want something from him. Maya's gaze softened, and she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter now, sincere in a way that felt real. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, She simply turned and began walking again, the weight of his apology still hanging in the air but no longer pressing down on her. She didn't need him to make things right because, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she already had. Richard watched her as she walked away, the soft sound of her footsteps on the stone path the only sound in the morning air. He didn't move, not immediately, as he processed the weight of her words. He knew he had a lot to prove, not just to her, but to himself. But in that moment, as he stood in the quiet of the early morning, he realized something. Maya had already given him everything he needed. All he had to do was listen. Maya stood by the large window, her hands resting gently on the sill. The sun had risen fully now, casting a soft glow over the garden below. The air was still, but there was a quiet energy in the space, like the world had paused, just for a moment. The light filtered through the leaves, creating patches of warmth on the cold stone floor. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. The silence wrapped around her, a strange comfort. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, the leaves dancing in the breeze, their movement slow, deliberate. The soft click of the door opening behind her barely broke the stillness. Richard stepped into the room, pausing as if unsure whether to approach. He stood there for a long moment, watching her, the distance between them palpable. The space felt larger now, heavier. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Maya turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge his presence, but her gaze remained on the light filtering through the glass. There was no need for words. She didn't turn back to him, didn't move. The room was filled with the quiet hum of the world continuing on, an unspoken understanding between them, weight that neither could yet move. Richard stayed where he was, his presence quiet, heavy, like a question that had no answer. The light shifted, the room growing warmer as the day unfolded. Maya let the stillness settle around her, and after a long while, Richard turned and walked away, his footsteps soft against the floor. The door closed behind him, and the silence returned, perfect, unbroken.